That's the CEO of Morgan Tech. A passenger whispered as the flight attendant brusquely handed her a cold sandwich instead of the lobster bisque she'd pre-ordered. Celeste Morgan didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed calm, but behind them, a quiet storm was rising. By the time the plane landed, the entire flight crew had been fired, and a revolution in luxury service had begun. Welcome to Stories by Xavier. Let's uncover what really happened. Celeste Morgan settled into Seat 1A aboard Straightest Air Flight 917, her posture straight and composed, a silent declaration of a journey ahead. She wasn't just any passenger. She was a powerhouse in the tech world, the CEO of Morgan Tech, a company renowned for its groundbreaking innovations in artificial intelligence and data security. This flight was another step toward a historic multi-billion-dollar deal that would expand her company's influence into Europe. Her tailored navy suit hugged her tall frame with precision, and her polished leather shoes caught the soft glow of the first-class cabin lights. Curly hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her presence was a blend of elegance and quiet strength. Around her, other passengers chatted softly, sipping champagne, unaware of the fierce mind sitting among them. Celeste's fingers traced the edge of her Hermes handbag before she pulled out her tablet, a familiar tool that held contracts, projections, and strategies. This flight wasn't just a transit. It was a moment of preparation and reflection. Her mind was a calm storm, calculating moves she'd been planning for years. Despite her achievements and status, Celeste was no stranger to the invisible barriers that still lingered in spaces dominated by privilege. She had long since learned that true power was shown not by volume or confrontation, but by measured actions and unyielding resolve. As the flight attendants began their service, a familiar mix of politeness and cold indifference brushed past her. She noticed the subtle glances that barely acknowledged her presence. The air was thick with an unspoken hierarchy, a reminder that even at the summit, the climb wasn't over. Celeste didn't flinch. This was more than a flight. This was a battleground for dignity, respect, and the quiet assertion of a rightful place. She fastened her seatbelt and looked ahead, ready to face whatever came next with unwavering grace. Celeste had pre-ordered her meal well in advance, a ritual she held on to, a small affirmation of her place in a world that rarely made room for someone like her. Lobster bisque to start, followed by a perfectly cooked prime steak paired with a vintage Chateau Margaux red wine. It wasn't about indulgence. It was a symbol, a quiet claim to a space usually reserved for others. She glanced at the elegant menu resting on the tray table, though she already knew what it contained. For years, this routine had been part of her first-class experience, a moment of comfort amidst the relentless pressure of leading a global tech empire. Her executive assistant had handled all the logistics, ensuring everything was in place. The emails confirming her special meal had come through weeks ago, and she had no reason to doubt they'd be honored. Celeste's mind flicked to the significance of this flight. It was bound for Geneva, where she would seal a deal that could redefine her company's future. This was no ordinary business trip. It was a milestone for her personally and professionally. Being the first Black woman at this level in her field wasn't just a headline. It was a daily reality she lived and conquered. The cabin hummed softly around her, the murmur of conversations blending with the clinks of fine china and crystal glasses. Flight attendants moved with practiced grace, attending to passengers with smiles that seemed automatic. But Celeste noticed the nuances, the eyes that lingered too briefly, the measured distance maintained by some. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She had encountered this before, an invisible wall disguised as protocol, a silent message that while she might be allowed to sit here, she wasn't always fully seen. But Celeste was nothing if not resilient. Her place was earned through decades of work, intelligence, and perseverance. As the seatbelt sign blinked off and the meal service began, Celeste braced herself for the moment she had anticipated, ready to navigate it not with anger, but with the precision and dignity that had become her trademark. The first signs of subtle exclusion began almost immediately. As the flight attendants moved down the aisle, their smiles seemed rehearsed, polite but distant. Celeste caught fleeting glances that quickly diverted elsewhere, as if her presence was a routine checkbox rather than a welcome guest. It was the kind of attention that felt like being noticed, but not truly seen. She observed how the crew addressed other passengers, especially the white men nearby, with warm familiarity and personalized greetings. Names were used effortlessly, drinks refilled before glasses emptied, and small talk about business and leisure filled the air. For Celeste, it was a reminder that these interactions weren't merely about service, they were about belonging. The atmosphere whispered the unspoken rules of first class, where status was as much about who you were as what you had achieved. Here, despite her accolades and influence, Celeste was still navigating a world shaped by long-standing traditions and invisible biases. A flight attendant passed by, offering hot towels and fresh champagne to the passengers beside her, but Celeste was overlooked. The subtlety was stark. No offer, no acknowledgement beyond a cursory glance. She didn't react outwardly. She had mastered the art of silent resilience. Her gaze lingered on the other passengers' trays, meticulously arranged meals, gleaming silverware, and glistening glasses filled with fine wine. It was a tableau of privilege that wasn't just served on plates, but in gestures and glances. For Celeste, every slight reinforced a truth she had lived with. Sometimes, respect had to be demanded not with anger, but with unwavering presence. In that moment, she was already planning her response. Not a spectacle, but a statement. The quiet strength in her eyes told a story far deeper than the polite smiles surrounding her. She was not just to fly, but to challenge the very system that sought to diminish her. Becky Whitmore appeared next, senior cabin crew, assigned to oversee service in the first-class cabin. Blonde hair pulled tight at the nape, a smile carefully practiced but lacking genuine warmth. Her pale eyes scanned the cabin with a flicker of calculation, settling briefly on Celeste before shifting away, as if already dismissing her presence. Becky's role was clear. Maintain the polished image of luxury service while navigating the fine line between professionalism and subtle social cues. But to Celeste, Becky represented much more than a flight attendant. She was a symbol of an ingrained attitude, one that saw privilege as inherited, not earned. As Becky approached, her demeanor was cool, measured. The greeting was formal, a barely concealed evaluation. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Becky, and I'll be serving you during this flight," she said with a tone that felt more like a scripted line than a welcome. Celeste met Becky's eyes steadily, her voice calm but assertive. "I believe you have my meal reservation from last week." There was no room for doubt, no invitation for dismissal. Becky's lips twitched in a fleeting smile, but her eyes hardened. "Yes, of course. We'll serve you as soon as the plane is stable," she replied, then turned away with a barely perceptible sneer. The slight motion was quick, but Celeste caught it. The unspoken message that she was an inconvenience, an afterthought in the well-oiled machine of first-class luxury. Becky's coldness wasn't personal, it was cultural. A legacy of entitlement masquerading as professionalism. Celeste didn't respond. Instead, she studied Becky's movements as she resumed her rounds, watching the way she bent a little too eagerly to the white passengers, laughed a little too easily at their jokes, and carried herself with an air of quiet superiority. This was the reality Celeste had prepared for. Not a clash of words, but a clash of wills. She was ready to meet it, not with confrontation, but with the quiet precision of a strategist who understood that true power often spoke softly. The routine service continued, but the tension beneath the polished veneer grew palpable. Becky moved from seat to seat, her smile immaculate, but her eyes distant when she reached Celeste. It was a practice dance, one she performed flawlessly for passengers deemed worthy of her attention, and one she withheld for those she judged otherwise. When Becky finally stopped beside Celeste, she did so with an almost mechanical politeness, placing a tray before her without a cover or any of the customary fanfare. The cold chicken sandwich and a half-filled glass of water stood stark against the backdrop of crystal wine glasses and silver trays gleaming elsewhere in the cabin. Celeste's gaze locked onto the meal, an unmistakable symbol of exclusion masquerading as oversight. "I pre-ordered my meal last week," she said, her voice steady but carrying a quiet authority. "I have confirmation emails and booking references." Becky shrugged, a dismissive motion that spoke volumes. "Maybe the system wasn't updated. It happens all the time," she replied, her tone void of apology or empathy. Without waiting for a response, Becky turned away, her steps brisk, as if eager to distance herself from the confrontation. Celeste watched her retreat, feeling the weight of the silent message. "You don't belong here." Around her, other passengers indulged in their meals. Lobster bisque, prime steak, vintage wine, all carefully prepared and served with attentive grace. The stark contrast was undeniable. Celeste did not react outwardly. There was no outburst, no public complaint. Instead, she let the moment sink in, a calculated pause that spoke louder than any words could. This wasn't just about a meal. It was about respect denied, a system designed to exclude even those who had fought tirelessly to earn their place. As the cold sandwich sat untouched before her, Celeste's mind was already racing, formulating the response that would shake the very foundations of that system. She was preparing to turn this slight into a catalyst for change, one measured step at a time. The cold sandwich before Celeste was more than just food. It was a symbol of the subtle exclusion that had become routine for many like her. The wilted lettuce and thin bread slices stood in stark contrast to the artfully plated dishes served to the white passengers nearby. Every detail, from the absent silver cutlery to the lack of a cloth-lined tray, spoke of a calculated dismissal. Celeste sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't reach for the sandwich, not out of pride, but because she needed to fully absorb the insult. This was not an accident, nor a simple error. It was a message wrapped in indifference, delivered with a cold gaze and a shrug. Her eyes scanned the cabin. 6 white men in tailored suits chatted effortlessly, raising their champagne glasses in quiet toasts. None of their gazes touched hers. They were oblivious or indifferent to the disparity, to the woman who had earned her seat through intellect and resilience, now relegated to a forgotten corner of the elite space. Memories flickered through Celeste's mind. The boardrooms where her ideas were overlooked, the presentations where questions were aimed not at her expertise, but at her presence, the countless moments where her voice was drowned by invisible walls. Yet she had never backed down. Every challenge had been met with quiet determination and unshakable confidence. But today was different. Today, the cold sandwich was a spark, a catalyst. Celeste understood that true power didn't need to erupt in noise or fury. It needed to be precise, unyielding, and irreversible. She reached for her phone, fingers moving with the certainty of a woman who knew exactly what needed to happen next. As the cabin lights dimmed and soft music played, Celeste's resolve hardened. This flight wasn't just about crossing continents. It was about crossing a line, and she was ready to redraw the boundaries of respect, dignity, and equity in spaces where they had long been denied. Celeste's fingers tapped rhythmically on the smooth surface of her tablet, a silent metronome echoing the resolve within. Around her, the cabin hummed with soft conversations and the clink of fine china, but her world had narrowed to one clear focus: action. She wasn't here for theatrics or outrage. She was here to wield power with precision. Her mind retraced the subtle signs she'd witnessed, the hurried service for others, the deliberate avoidance, the carefully veiled disdain hidden behind practiced smiles. Becky Whitmore's behavior was no isolated incident. It was a symptom of a culture that had normalized exclusion under the guise of professionalism. Celeste opened her secure messaging app and typed a succinct command to Aaliyah Grant, her trusted executive assistant back home. Activate emergency audit protocol. Flight 917. Cabin crew IDST 9035. Confirmation in 10 minutes. Each word was clipped, purposeful, an order, not a plea. She knew the significance of this move. It was more than just a complaint. It was the opening salvo in a battle against a system that had allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. Her company's technology would soon sift through data, crew profiles, passenger feedback, service logs, to expose patterns hidden in plain sight. As she sent the message, Celeste allowed herself a brief breath, steadying the storm beneath her calm exterior. This was the quiet revolution she had prepared for, leveraging information, influence, and integrity to bring about real change. Her gaze lifted to the cabin ceiling where soft lights twinkled like distant stars. Outside the windows, the night sky stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of possibility. For the first time in the flight, Celeste felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for all those who had been sidelined and silenced. This was no longer about a meal or a single flight attendant. It was about dismantling the invisible barriers that kept so many from truly belonging. And from seat 1A, Celeste was ready to rewrite the rules. The first response came swiftly. Back in New York, Aaliyah Grant was already at work, fingers flying across keyboards in the quiet of Morgan Tech's 42nd floor office. Her frizzy hair pulled tight in a bun. Aaliyah was the perfect partner for Celeste, calm, focused, and relentless. She accessed Stratus Air's partner database and began pulling crew records. Senior cabin crew Rebecca Ann Whitmore, IDST, in 9035, had been with the airline since 2018. The data looked ordinary on the surface, but Aaliyah knew better than to trust appearances. Diving deeper, she reviewed passenger feedback from the past 3 years involving Whitmore. Patterns quickly emerged. Complaints from passengers of color about delayed service, missing pre-ordered meals, and cold, indifferent attitudes. None of these incidents had led to formal disciplinary action. Aaliyah's brows furrowed as she sifted through internal memos and break-room chatter. Lines like focus on passengers who tip well and deal lightly with those who complain too much surfaced. It was a code, a culture tolerated quietly, concealed behind layers of corporate silence. She cross-referenced behavioral recognition data developed by Morgan Tech, a sophisticated system analyzing tone, facial expressions, and response times. The results were stark. Whitmore's interactions showed an 87.4% bias interaction index against non-white customers, repeated over 36 flights. Aaliyah compiled a detailed report, encrypting it and sending it up the chain of command within Stratus Air. This wasn't just about one flight or one flight attendant. It was about exposing a systemic problem that had festered beneath the polished surface of luxury service. Back on the plane, Celeste felt a quiet satisfaction as her smartwatch vibrated softly, a confirmation from Aaliyah that the audit was underway. The seeds of change had been planted, and there was no turning back. Celeste allowed her mind to drift briefly, recalling the many times subtle discrimination had shadowed her path. The memory of her first big pitch in Palo Alto came rushing back, young, prepared, and eager to prove herself. Yet, as she entered the boardroom, one white man ignored her entirely, addressing the secretary instead. "Could you bring me a coffee?" he demanded, dismissing the innovator who had developed a $15 million AI security platform. She hadn't gotten angry. Instead, she smiled, responding calmly, "I'll bring it, if you let me present afterward." The room had fallen silent, respect dawning in that moment. That was the first of many battles fought with quiet strength and unyielding resolve. She thought of London, where as the first black woman among the top 10 under 40 CEOs, a journalist asked if her success was luck or gender equality policy. Celeste's answer was sharp, measured. "Success comes when you work 3 times harder than everyone else, are doubted 10 times more, and keep moving forward as if no one can stop you." Those moments had shaped her. She understood that the fight wasn't always loud or visible. It was often a quiet endurance, a series of calculated moves toward breaking ceilings that weren't meant for women like her. Now, seated in the luxurious cabin of Flight 917, the cold meal was yet another reminder of those unseen battles. But Celeste's resolve was stronger than ever. She wouldn't just endure this. She would turn it into a reckoning. The system might have thought she was invisible, But from Seat 1A, Celeste Morgan was preparing to make an impact no one could ignore. The flight continued, and so did the silent war unfolding in first class. Celeste maintained her calm facade, but beneath it, a storm was brewing, a storm fueled by years of subtle dismissals and quiet indignities. She was not the woman to shout or cause a scene. Her power lay in measured, deliberate action. She reviewed the meal service around her, delicate dishes delivered with fanfare to others, while she remained with the cold sandwich, untouched but heavy with meaning. The disparity was undeniable, an open secret concealed behind smiles and professional etiquette. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Aaliyah confirmed that the emergency audit protocol was in motion. Data was streaming in: crew profiles, passenger feedback, video recordings. The evidence was gathering, and the system was about to speak for itself. Celeste leaned back, eyes steady, knowing that true strength was shown not by anger, but by control. She didn't need to raise her voice. The facts would do that for her. Every delayed service, every ignored request, every subtle slight was being cataloged. Around her, other passengers remained oblivious, caught up in their own worlds. But for Celeste, this was a pivotal moment, a quiet rebellion born not of defiance, but of unyielding dignity. She pictured the boardrooms and conference halls where decisions shaped industries and futures. Today, she was shifting the balance in those spaces as well. Not with confrontation, but with undeniable truth. The flight was more than a journey across continents. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And Celeste Morgan, seated firmly in 1A, was ready to lead it. The quiet hum of the cabin was punctuated only by the soft footsteps of the crew and the low murmur of conversations. Celeste's focus, however, was razor-sharp. Her phone screen glowed with incoming data as Aaliyah's audit delved deeper into the shadows of Stratus Air Service records. The findings were troubling, but not surprising. Crew members with histories of complaints related to biased behavior, repeated patterns of delayed service, and subtle acts of exclusion. Becky Whitmore's name appeared prominently, her record marred by multiple unaddressed incidents, hidden beneath corporate silence. Celeste's mind sifted through the layers of systemic failure, the excuses of no direct evidence, the shrugging off of customer concerns, the willful blindness that let such discrimination fester unchallenged. She drafted a message, precise and unyielding. Activate full internal investigation. Flight 917 crew. Immédiate suspension protocole. Notify legal team. The words were typed with cold determination, a command that would ripple through the halls of Stratus Air. Minutes later, her smartwatch vibrated again. Confirmation that the CEO of Stratus Air had authorized the emergency measures. HR and legal teams were en route to Geneva to begin their inquiry. Celeste leaned back in her seat, the weight of the moment settling over her. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or demand attention. The system's own records were now speaking louder than any protest could. From Seat 1A, the message was clear: injustice hidden in plain sight would no longer be tolerated. And the change she had ignited was unstoppable. As the audit unfolded, a mosaic of evidence began to take shape. Cabin cameras, service logs, and passenger feedback painted a detailed picture of repeated neglect and favoritism. The luxury of first class, once thought to be a sanctuary of impeccable service, revealed cracks etched by subtle but pervasive bias. Video footage showed Becky Whitmore's interactions, swiftly refilling wine for some, barely acknowledging others. Timestamps exposed delayed responses to call buttons from passengers of color, including Celeste herself. These weren't isolated moments, they were patterns. Celeste watched the screen as clips played, each frame reinforcing the truth she already knew but had to prove. The system, despite all its pride and protocols, had allowed discrimination to thrive silently. Her thoughts were steady but fierce. This wasn't a personal vendetta. It was a reckoning for a culture that masked exclusion in politeness and procedure. The evidence was undeniable, objective, and damning. Behind the scenes, the HR and legal teams were preparing to take decisive action. The suspension of involved crew members was imminent, a necessary first step toward systemic reform. Celeste's phone buzzed again. A message from Aaliyah confirming the initiation of a confidential emergency meeting with Stratus Air's board. This was no longer a flight issue. It was a crisis demanding leadership and transparency. From her vantage point, Celeste felt the weight of responsibility, but also the promise of change. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. She glanced out the window, the night sky vast and unyielding. The path ahead was clear: expose, confront, and rebuild. And she was ready to lead. The cabin atmosphere remained unchanged to the casual observer. Polished smiles, polite nods, the gentle clinking of glasses. But beneath that facade, a revolution was quietly underway. The system's cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. The crew's patterns of bias weren't confined to one flight or one passenger. They were woven into the fabric of Stratus Air service culture. It was a culture where unspoken rules governed who received warmth and attention, and who was made invisible. Celeste reflected on how Becky Whitmore embodied this culture, never overtly hostile, but consistently indifferent. Her professional mask hid a bias that was learned and allowed, a subtle weapon wielded under the guise of efficiency and protocol. The audit's findings had sent ripples through the airline's leadership. Immediate suspension of Becky and 2 other crew members was ordered. Their past flights were under review, every interaction scrutinized for evidence of discrimination. More importantly, the investigation spurred a broader conversation within Stratus Air about unconscious bias, equity, and the urgent need for systemic change. Mandatory training programs were being drafted. New feedback mechanisms were on the horizon. Celeste knew this was only the beginning. Changing culture wasn't about removing a few individuals. It was about transforming mindsets and practices entrenched over decades. From her seat, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The system was finally waking up, and she was at the heart of that awakening. But she also knew the road ahead would be long, requiring vigilance, persistence, and unyielding resolve. And Celeste Morgan was ready for the challenge. With the investigation underway, Celeste shifted her focus to the immediate moment aboard Flight 917. Another attendant approached, Daniel Clean, whose demeanor was noticeably more hesitant as he neared her seat. There was a flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he sensed the gathering storm. Celeste seized the moment with her usual calm precision. "Mr. Clean," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of command, "I'd like to ask about the meal prioritization policy. Miss Whitmore mentioned prioritizing passengers. What criteria determine that?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, searching for an escape from the question. "It's usually based on order time and flight frequency," he stammered. "Sometimes system errors happen, but there's no discrimination policy." Celeste held his gaze, unblinking. "I'm a Diamond Plus member. I order my meals 7 days ago and have confirmation. Yet I was not served the premium meal. If not discrimination, then what is it?" Daniel's facade cracked. He lowered his head, stepping away quickly, avoiding further confrontation. Celeste's smile was quiet but sharp. No answer was needed. His silence spoke volumes. The subtle trap was set and sprung. This exchange wasn't just about a meal. It was evidence, an admission wrapped in hesitation. From seat 1A, Celeste was dismantling the narrative of innocence the crew tried to maintain. Behind her calm exterior, a deeper strategy was unfolding. The data was gathering. The system was being forced to confront its truth. And when the plane touched down, no one would be able to ignore what had been exposed. As the plane began its descent toward Geneva, an undercurrent of tension stirred beneath the cabin's quiet surface. Celeste remained composed, but her mind raced through the consequences her actions would soon unleash. The emergency audit was no longer a quiet inquiry. It had evolved into a full-scale investigation that would shake Stratus Air's leadership to its core. The crew continued their rounds, unaware that their every move was now being closely monitored. Cameras, logs, and passenger feedback were being compiled in real time, creating an irrefutable record of their conduct. Celeste's phone buzzed softly again, delivering updates from Aaliyah. Legal teams and human resources were preparing to convene immediately upon landing. Temporary suspensions were imminent, and a formal internal review would follow. She glanced around the cabin. Becky Whitmore carried on with her duties, her confident mask hiding the growing unease that would come when the truth surfaced. Daniel Clean moved more cautiously now, the earlier confrontation lingering in his mind. For the first time in years, Celeste felt the weight of systemic change gathering momentum. This was more than a personal victory. It was a call for accountability in an industry long resistant to self-scrutiny. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, breaking the stillness like a starting gun. The journey was far from over, but the path was clear. Celeste Morgan, seated in 1A, had set in motion a reckoning that would redefine luxury service, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been quietly sidelined. As the plane taxied to a stop, Celeste felt the electric pulse of anticipation. The calm exterior she wore was a mask for the intensity of what was about to unfold. On the ground, Stratus Air's top executives were already mobilizing, a direct result of the data she'd set in motion from Seat 1A. Two figures waited at the jet bridge: Brandon Ellis, the regional CEO for Europe, and a sharp-eyed legal affairs representative. Their presence was no accident. This was more than a routine arrival. It was the opening act of a crisis management operation designed to contain the damage and begin reckoning. Celeste stepped off the plane with measured confidence. No apologies, no words wasted. The airline's leadership had learned that this wasn't about placation. It was about transformation. As she passed the gathered executives, she uttered only one sentence, loud enough for all to hear. "This is just the beginning." Behind her, the flight crew prepared to disembark, unaware of the storm waiting at the end of the jetway. Becky Whitmore's practiced smile faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. At the rear exit, members of Stratus Air's HR and crisis teams stood in wait. The crew was directed toward an emergency meeting room, their routine shattered by the gravity of what was coming. The facade of normalcy cracked as silence replaced the usual chatter. Celeste's impact was immediate. The cold sandwich, the ignored meal, the subtle bias. It had culminated in this moment, a reckoning fueled by evidence, resolve, and quiet strength. This wasn't just a flight. It was a turning point. And from Seat 1A, Celeste Morgan had rewritten the rules. The emergency meeting room was cold, sterile, a far cry from the luxury of the cabin Celeste had just left behind. The crew filed in quietly, their confident facades replaced by apprehension. Becky Whitmore sat stiffly, her usual composed smile nowhere to be found. The weight of the investigation pressed down on her like a heavy fog. An HR investigator began, her voice measured but firm. "Ms. Whitmore, we will be reviewing your service records from Flight 917 as well as previous flights. This meeting is mandatory and recorded. Any findings may result in disciplinary action, including termination." Becky swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. The video footage was played, the moments where she'd shrugged off Celeste's requests, the selective attentiveness to certain passengers, the dismissive comments caught on cabin audio. The evidence was undeniable. No longer could such behavior hide behind polite smiles and corporate lip service. Every slight, every neglectful act was cataloged and ready to be addressed. Other crew members faced similar scrutiny, their own records revealing patterns of bias and unprofessional conduct. The airline's leadership was making clear that tolerance for discrimination, no matter how subtle, was over. Back in the hotel, Celeste reflected quietly. This was not just about one cold meal or one flight attendant. It was about dismantling an entire culture of exclusion. Her calm presence had sparked a storm, a reckoning long overdue. And the silence in that meeting room was the sound of change finally being heard. The news broke quickly and without mercy. Within hours of the incident becoming public, major outlets picked up the story. A powerful black CEO denied her rightful first-class meal, sparking a deep dive into the luxury airline's discriminatory practices. Headlines screamed of silent exclusion and systemic bias cloaked in polite smiles. Social media erupted. The hashtag Seat1 a spread like wildfire, with thousands sharing personal stories of being overlooked, ignored, or dismissed in spaces where they should have belonged. The quiet storm Celeste had started from her seat reached far beyond the confines of a single flight. Investors and partners demanded swift action. Stratus Air faced mounting pressure from shareholders, regulators, and advocacy groups. The airline was forced into a defensive posture, scrambling to contain the damage and demonstrate genuine commitment to change. Meanwhile, Celeste received calls from leaders in business, government, and civil rights organizations. She became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of transformation. Her measured approach, leveraging evidence and integrity, inspired many who had long endured quiet discrimination. Behind the scenes, Celeste worked closely with the airline's leadership, guiding them toward meaningful reform. Her voice was calm, but her influence undeniable, a beacon in a turbulent industry in desperate need of change. The story was no longer just about a denied meal. It was about dismantling barriers and creating space where respect was not optional but guaranteed. As the investigation unfolded, several faces from Stratus Air's past surfaced. Among them were passengers, employees, and insiders who had long suspected the airline service culture was fractured by unspoken biases. Quiet complaints and hushed conversations now found a public platform. Former flight attendants came forward, sharing stories of subtle exclusions and unaddressed incidents. Passengers recounted their own experiences, being overlooked, having requests delayed, or feeling invisible despite paying top dollar. Each narrative wove into the growing tapestry, exposing systemic issues. Celeste listened carefully to these voices, understanding that change required more than individual accountability. It demanded collective acknowledgement. These stories validated her own experiences and underscored the urgent need for cultural transformation. Simultaneously, the airline's leadership convened crisis meetings, grappling with the fallout. The pressure mounted as regulators and advocacy groups demanded transparency and reform. Stratus Air faced a reckoning not just in the court of public opinion, but within its own boardrooms. Celeste's role evolved from complainant to advisor. Her approach was steady and strategic, emphasizing systemic solutions over reactive gestures. She urged the airline to invest in comprehensive training, better feedback mechanisms, and ongoing evaluation. The road ahead was steep, but the momentum was undeniable. The once hidden fractures in Stratus Air's elite service culture were now exposed to light, and with that illumination came the possibility of true change. The public hearing was unlike anything Stratus Air had ever faced. Held before a panel of aviation regulators, consumer advocates, and industry experts, it was a forum where the airline had to answer for its failings openly and transparently. Cameras recorded every word, every moment of accountability. Celeste attended, not as an adversary, but as a voice for the countless passengers who had suffered in silence. Her calm, poised testimony struck a chord, illustrating the everyday realities behind the headlines and statistics. She detailed her experience, the cold sandwich, the ignored requests, the dismissive attitude, not as an isolated incident, but as emblematic of a wider cultural problem. Her words were measured but firm, calling for systemic change rather than superficial fixes. The airline's executives pledged cooperation, announcing new initiatives, mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff, revamped customer feedback channels, and the creation of an independent oversight committee to monitor progress. Audience members responded with cautious optimism, many moved by Celeste's dignified courage. Social media buzzed with renewed calls for equity and respect in luxury service sectors. For Celeste, this hearing was a milestone, a public acknowledgement that the culture had to shift, that silence was no longer an option. It was a moment of validation and a call to continued vigilance. The path forward was still challenging, but with each step, the invisible barriers were slowly beginning to crumble. The courthouse was filled with hushed whispers as witnesses took the stand. Celeste sat poised, her presence commanding yet composed. The trial wasn't just about one flight. It was a reckoning for an industry steeped in subtle discrimination and silent exclusion. Testimonies poured in. Passengers recalled being ignored. Crew members admitted to biases previously masked by professional decorum. The evidence was overwhelming. Service logs, recorded conversations, and the damning cabin footage Celeste had helped bring to light. Emotion ran high as victims shared stories of hurt and humiliation, their voices echoing through the courtroom. But Celeste's calm testimony reminded everyone that strength lay in dignity and the pursuit of justice, not anger. The legal battle was fierce, but the tide was turning. Judges, jurors, and observers witnessed not only individual failings, but a systemic problem demanding overhaul. Outside the courthouse, media outlets covered the proceedings extensively, spotlighting Celeste as a trailblazer who refused to accept silence or invisibility. The trial became a catalyst, inspiring other victims to speak out and businesses to reevaluate their practices. It was justice delayed, but no longer denied. For Celeste, the courtroom was another battleground where she wielded her quiet power, turning personal pain into a public call for equity and respect. The wounds inflicted by years of subtle exclusion were deep, but healing had begun. Celeste understood that true progress required more than policy changes. It demanded empathy, education, and ongoing dialogue. She dedicated herself to fostering spaces where marginalized voices could be heard and valued. Stratus Air launched company-wide initiatives focused on cultural competence, unconscious bias training, and inclusive leadership. Employees were encouraged to share experiences and participate in workshops designed to dismantle ingrained prejudices. Celeste personally mentored young women of color entering industries where they were often overlooked, sharing lessons from her journey and encouraging resilience paired with strategic action. Communities rallied around the cause, supporting efforts to redefine luxury as a space of genuine respect and belonging rather than exclusion. Though the path was long, Celeste found hope in the stories of transformation. Employees growing in awareness, passengers feeling seen, and a culture slowly shifting toward equity. Her quiet revolution continued beyond the courtroom and boardrooms, touching lives and inspiring change on a broader scale. She knew the fight wasn't over, but every step forward was a victory born of courage and conviction. Restoring the house meant more than fixing policies. It meant rebuilding trust. Celeste understood this as she engaged with both the airline's leadership and its frontline staff. Open forums were held where employees shared their perspectives, challenges, and hopes for a better future. Morgan Tech partnered with Stratus Air to develop innovative tools that monitored service quality and detected bias in real time. Data-driven insights guided ongoing training and accountability measures, making reform tangible and measurable. Celeste also emphasized community outreach, supporting initiatives that encourage diversity not only in customer service, but across all corporate levels. She knew representation mattered. It shaped culture and changed perceptions. The airline's renewed commitment was reflected in passenger experiences. Positive feedback increased, and previously marginalized voices found platforms to be heard and valued. Those scars remained. The journey toward genuine inclusion gained momentum. The work was ongoing, but the foundations were laid. Celeste's leadership had sparked more than policy change. It had ignited a movement, a call to honor dignity in every interaction and to build a luxury service culture that welcomed all. As the company looked ahead, the legacy of Seat 1A became a beacon for equity and respect in an industry once resistant to change. Celeste sat alone in a quiet conference room overlooking Lake Geneva, the stillness outside mirroring the calm strength within. Months had passed since that fateful flight, yet the impact of her actions rippled through the airline industry and beyond. The small black bird-shaped pin on her lapel symbolized the Seat 1A coalition, a movement she had helped inspire, advocating fairness and dignity in luxury service for all. She reflected on how a simple act, a quiet refusal to accept injustice, had ignited a transformation few expected. Celeste's journey wasn't about headlines or accolades. It was about changing the system that had long excluded people like her, creating spaces where respect was not a privilege, but a right. The reserved seat of change plaque now placed at 1A on every Stratus Air flight was a silent reminder to all passengers and crew. Inclusion must be intentional, visible, and unwavering. Her letter to a young girl in Florida, told not to dream too big, came to mind. She had written, "You have the right to sit in seat 1A. If they say no, ask who this system is designed for." Celeste smiled softly. True power required no shouting, only the courage to act at the right moment. As the plane began its taxi for takeoff, Celeste fastened her seatbelt, ready to continue her journey, not just across continents, but toward a future where everyone's seat was guaranteed and respected.